two videos as a way of thinking about how this, again, very difficult to describe blob called global civil society can speak back to things. Like, for example, plastics. The United States, how they deal with sort of plastics and the treaties that go on with that, about how Bolsonaro, for example, is dealing with the Amazon fires. And it's interesting that video was in English. It was not in Portuguese, which is what they speak in Brazil. The target audience was not Bolsonaro, or even a lot of Bolsonaro's citizens of Brazil, I should say. The target is us. So why, I don't vote for Bolsonaro. I don't have any say in the Brazilian government. Why am I a part of this conversation? That's some of the things we want to talk about as well. Like, what does a global civil society have to do with all this? The debate is not about the existence of this, again, partly because we haven't defined what it is, but the debate is really about whether it does anything. We know there's global conversations going on. The question is, does it have an impact? The place that we should begin to look in global civil society for the ability to sort of talk back, I guess you could say, the voice for the voiceless, are international NGOs. Why not individuals? And there probably are a few individuals we could point to, like, for example, Nobel Peace Prize winners, or Bill Gates, or former presidents. There's a sense in which some individuals have voice, but out of the billions, for the most part, most of us don't have a lot of voice. Having voice in global civil society depends on some things. Like, for example, if you even think about it, having voice in civil society, having voice in America, let's just say, or even having voice on the campus of Point Loma, like, you're one student in the whole mess. I'm one faculty member in the whole mess. Like, I can maybe say something, but will anybody listen to me? There's thousands of other voices. Why listen to me? Usually, I will be listened to if there are other people who agree with me, which means it's not so much me saying it, it's us saying it. And so group is actually very important in this thing. Being able to group voices together gives the voice more volume, I guess you could say. So it depends upon how representative it is. Is it representative of just a few people, or is it representative of a lot of people? Is it representative of a key group of people? Things like that. Money. Again, Bill Gates has a lot of money. I don't. So if I want to have a voice out in global civil society, I probably have to pool my money with a bunch of other people in, like, giving donations to, say, Human Rights Watch or to Democracy Now! Or something like that. Institutionalization of these things, and then some sort of institutionalized form, the NGO forming, that its job is to essentially make sure our voice, our position gets out there and is speaking. NGOs are also more effective than individuals because NGOs tend to connect with each other. They're almost attracted to one another because they're kind of doing the same thing out there. They may be doing it on different issues, but they're doing the same type of activity, which is education, which is speaking voice to the voice or for the voiceless, things like that. So cross-border, a group in Brazil and a group in the United States can work together. That can help out. Social movements, transnational networks. So again, these linkages and linkages and linkages. And then there is additional connectedness from an NGO to an intergovernmental organization. Think like the UN. Human Rights Watch, for example, has much more access to the UN than, say, I do. Like, it's not that the UN hates me, it's just not going to take my call, but it'll take Human Rights Watch's call. And so if I want to speak for the voice, if I want to speak into global civil society, having others who are saying the same thing really helps amplify my voice. So NGOs become a really big part of this process, which we're going to get a lot more next week. Under most of these definitions, there's always been some form of global civil society. So the question then becomes, so what's new about this? Like, there's always been some global conversation, even if it's been very mild, even if it's been very limited to access. In other words, only those who have power can speak in this. What's new today is, of course, technology. If you think about, like, for example, the internet, how does having the internet and everybody having a smartphone, how does that change the ability to have a global conversation? What does it mean? Who's left out of this conversation if a lot of that conversation is happening online? Increased global consciousness. So because more people are aware of and concerned with things happening at the global level, there's more of a conversation about that. There's more resources that are available to that. And then, of course, globalization itself, that we are, because of economic changes, way more interlinked than we ever have been before. Then there is no issue that is sort of too separate from me. All right. One more slide I want to put on this, and I'm going to have you now watch another video. And this is where I'm going to make it messier. Okay, so get ready for a little messiness. Get something to clean this up with, because it's going to get messy. Global civil society is a fuzzy, contested concept. Like here in class, we can talk about this and say, it's this thing. But it's really not this thing. It's not something you can pin down and say, here's the definition of it. It's got a dual meaning, and let me just explain what I mean, and this makes its meaning confusing. On the one hand, when we talk about global civil society, we're talking about something descriptive. In other words, this is what global civil society is. It's these groups, it's these people, it's all these issues, and they're having this conversation trying to change how things are done. On the flip side, we also know it's normative. In other words, we think global civil society should be a particular way. It should be standing for certain things. And that makes it very confusing in some ways. Don't worry about that for now. What I'm really concerned about is this, is what is it really? And I want to critique it a little bit. I want to be clear that I am saying global civil society is a thing that is doing stuff out there. The question is it doing what we want it to do? And this is where this gets messy. We know it's doing something. Is it doing what we want it to do? Is it integrated global society, sort of this beautiful picture about all of humanity having a conversation about what we want? Or is it really just thinly disguised form of the West dominating everything? In other words, where I could say Bill Gates has a lot more voice than I do, can I also say at the global level, I, an American, have a lot more voice than someone from Bangladesh? Not because we think that's how it should be, but because that tends to be how it works out. The United States has way more power. I tend to have, an American will tend to have more, on average, resources, so they get to have more voice in terms of money being spent on things. Technology, I may be more interconnected than, say, someone in Bangladesh, the average person in Bangladesh. So is it really sort of this great, grand conversation of all of us, or is it more of a thinly disguised form of Western domination? Another question might be global markets and economic efficiency. So are we talking about, again, sort of this globalization sort of being this very efficient system as capitalism spreads everywhere, or is it really just multinational corporation, particularly European-owned multinational corporations dominating the world? Are we talking about the spread of democracy and freedom, or the erosion of democracy and freedom where it matters most? I'm not going to go deep into that. Don't worry about that. That'll be messier if I go into that. But are we talking about a northern and western view of the world, or a southern eastern view? Is one sort of over the other? Like we would say, of course, humanity, but humanity isn't all the same. So what's dominating? Is it a business neoliberal view, or can anyone offer an alternative view? So for example, if I come along and say, you know what, capitalism is probably not working very well. We need to get rid of that and try something else. Is that not allowed in this conversation? Does that make sense? And so, anyways, I just want to point out that it's not just sort of humanity is saying something and everybody's super happy about it. It's messy, and there's the conversation we have itself is going to be messy. In the same way, if we have a classroom, and, all students are equal to all students. Well, let's be honest, if we're having a classroom discussion, I think we all know that the classroom extroverts are going to dominate the conversation. Now, is that unfair? Should we do things to adjust that so that we all have voice in this thing? Or is it just, if you don't speak up, you don't speak up, and that's kind of the way that it is. That's the same thing at the global level, except instead of talking about extroversion, we're talking about things like money and power and all that kind of stuff. All right, I want you to watch another video here on global civil society and the pandemic, and then I got one more slide after that, and then we'll be done.